Okay, let's go ahead and get started. If people join a little bit late, that's fine. Thanks for joining our second video chat. I'm really excited. It's really nice to actually interact with you as beings and not lines of type on the screen. So why don't we start with just quick introductions. So just quickly introduce yourself, and then if you could describe an informal learning experience from your childhood that you still remember fondly. So it could be at a library or something somewhere else. For example, I'll start. I'm Kelly Hoffman. You probably recognize my name. I'm facilitating this e-course. And the experience that I'm thinking about, I was probably 8 years old or so, and we took a field trip to a one-room schoolhouse. And we were assigned a biography, or sort of a role to play of a student from that one-room schoolhouse from the turn of the last century, I think. And we just kind of lived a day in the life of those kids. And I was so excited about it, and it was so much fun, and I still remember how great that was. So why don't we just go down the list here. Somebody's on the phone. Would you like to introduce yourself? In the 563 area code, if you can. Maybe having some trouble. Angela, would you like to go next?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Just fine.
Okay. I'm in a study room and it says to please keep your voice lowered, which is really hard for me because I have a loud voice to begin with. So I am thinking about a time that I made Christmas ornaments with my mom and grandma. We live in Wisconsin, so we wanted to package up snow and send it to people that wouldn't have snow. So what we did was we took frozen snowballs and then we quickly dipped them into melted wax and then put a hook in them so that you could hang them on a Christmas tree. So of course what happened was everything would thaw inside. So you would have this liquid inside of the wax, but it really was a snowball. So I just remember doing that with my mom and grandma, and it was such a neat experience because you had to work really fast. So that's my experience.
That's awesome. That sounds like so much fun.
It was.
Let's see, Katie, you're next alphabetically.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yay! I was a theater kid growing up, so talk about connected learning. I worked with my peers and with experts to turn this old theater into a barn, and learned a lot about everything along the way. I mean, yeah, I would call that an informal learning experience, but we memorized lines, we learned choreography, but we also made friends and learned how to take a project from beginning to end, and the finished project was on display in our community. And I made lifelong friends.
That's awesome. What plays were you in?
I could give you a list, but I was in a group in Ellicott City, Maryland called Onstage Productions, and they ran 2 kids groups and a teen group out of the little theater on the corner on Main Street. And so we did a lot of, in the spring we usually did educational shows because we would tour them to elementary schools during spring break. So we did a show about George Washington, and we did a show about the history of music, and then we did some fun stuff like there was a play about comic book characters or something, and then it was something I took with me into high school and college, and just this winter, I filmed a promotional video for our library for our annual gala fundraiser where our theme this year was alien abduction, and my husband Earl was abducted. So
I'm sorry.
so it was a skill I carried with me into adulthood, I suppose.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Madonna.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, hello.
Hello. I would say that my experiences come from the family farm I grew up on. You were constantly working with my parents and my family, learning directly from somebody who had the experience and the knowledge. And therefore, you took along the knowledge and you learned all the skills right alongside of them.
What were your favorite parts of the farm? What were your favorite chores?
Well, it was more like when the pigs were born or the calves were born and going along and tagging them or taking care of them when they were little.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Okay, Paula.
Hi. I think, you know, there are a lot of things I could talk about, but I think the one I'm going to talk about is when I would go to summer camp and we would do tie-dyeing and batiking. There's a lot of like planning to figure out how to get to that final picture that you want. And yeah. And, you know, working with peers who are also in the process of trying to figure this out, but then also counselors and other adults who are on staff who had a lot of experience doing this and could sort of guide and lead the way. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that sounds great. So you guys kind of already anticipated my next question. I can see you already thinking this way. But I was wondering, when you're thinking about that learning experience that you still remember, and we obviously remember these very fondly, I can see the smiles in everyone's faces. What kind of outcomes could you connect to that experience that you had? So for instance, in my case, I didn't realize this at the time, but looking back at it, I can see how it helped me learn how to shift my perspective, to see things from the perspective of somebody else who might have been very different from me and see those differences, but also see the similarities. So I could say that an outcome that is still with me today is the ability to shift my perspective like that. So how would you guys describe the outcomes of those experiences you were just talking about?
I would say one of the outcomes that I would take with me is that the importance of doing things together as a family and creating something from scratch and sharing with other people.
I'd say that the concept of getting in your hands in and working alongside somebody while you're teaching them something rather than being just up in front of them.
Yeah, that's great.
I would also say the process of planning, breaking down whatever is the final thing is into the steps of how to get there, and then iteration, trying it different kinds of times, seeing how it goes.
Yeah. So when we're talking about outcomes, that's kind of the perspective that we're trying to think about when we're talking about outcomes this week. Of thinking beyond just what we're doing right now on this program and realizing that even if we don't feel like it's such a big, grand program, it will have that kind of an impact on people who are participating way down the road. And sometimes it can be difficult to shift that perspective and think about it long-term like that. But that is kind of the goal of thinking about outcomes and then planning your program to reach those outcomes. So what have you heard about outcomes or outcome-based evaluation before this class, if anything?
I'm starting to look into project outcome, but I haven't implemented it yet.
Yeah, that's a really great resource.
We actually started using Project Outcome for our summer reading program last year to help with a grant we're doing. and our challenge was getting enough responses. But it's something I've heard talked about for a couple of years, but haven't done a lot with.
Yeah. So what kind of things were you doing that you didn't get the response from?
Well, we did a survey at the end of the program to see how the program had actually affected change in the participants' lives, and it was just it was hard to remember to give them the survey, and not everybody wants to take the time to fill out the survey, so.
I kind of feel that surveys are an outdated way anymore to getting information from people. Even myself, I oftentimes don't fill out a survey because there's other things that need to be done, or I don't find that the value comes back to me in filling out a survey. So I don't know if anybody else has any other ideas, a way to collect information and get people to provide feedback.
We've started using, or at least I've started using talkback boards, which are, it's like a version of a survey, but it's just like a big sheet of paper that you write 4 questions on in order to get so it's a very, very quick response. We use it with our children's programming and family programs. Kids have fun answering questions. So it's not extensive. It takes about 30 seconds. It's like the longest thing is to read the question. And we've gotten really great response from them, being able to use them. People actually like them.
So is that something where you like hang it up and then people write on it, or they put Post-it notes?
Yes, and actually I can show you one. 1 second.
Oh, cool. I'd like to point out that Katie in the chat has shared her, I guess that's the alien abduction video. So I will definitely be checking that out later. Oh, cool.
It's like a big poster board. We have little questions, and then we give them stickers.
Oh, cool.
And then, yeah, they're a couple stuck together. But that's, so it is essentially a survey, but it's done not in like, here's a piece of paper, fill it out, take your golf pencil, spend time reading this, even though you're trying to get out of the room and move away, move on to your next. Yeah. Yeah,
I love that. And it's so easy to put a sticker on. It doesn't take any time at all, right? I've seen variations on that where it'll be a question and then there's Post-it notes and people can, throughout the day or the week or whatever, write responses on them. But I hadn't seen the stickers before. I love that. It's great.
Yeah, the kids love them. And teens love them too. It's not just kids. But yeah.
Everyone loves stickers. Yeah. I liked what you were saying, Madonna, about how filling out a survey, you don't always see the benefit that's coming back to you. I think that's a really good point. I think there is a lot of survey fatigue sometimes, and people feel like they're putting work into something and they don't see that it's actually being used. Even if it is, they don't necessarily see that. But something more creative can definitely get more attention and a better response.
Yeah, and I think that people would feel more encouraged to fill them out if they knew there was a way that it was coming back to benefit them. When you don't see that come back, the value of it does. But I like the idea of I think it was Paul that was showing us that sticker. I really like the idea of that.
Yeah, and one of the challenges of connected learning, which is also an opportunity, is that some of these things can be hard some of these outcomes can be hard to measure with like a traditional survey, either because they're so subjective or nebulous, or they're not the kind of things that the participants are actually going to see themselves necessarily. Like when I was 7 years old, I didn't realize I was learning to shift my perspective and think about things differently. So being able to capture that can be a real challenge with connected learning. Are there any other favorite feedback or evaluation tools? I love those stickers so much. It's so brilliant. So what experience have you had in your library or elsewhere with articulating specific outcomes for a program?
This is Angela. I think part of what we struggle with is when you've been allocated grant funds and then you have to report back on what those outcomes are. I think it's really hard to articulate that sometimes unless you're gathering throughout a program.
Yeah. Anyone else worked with outcomes in your library before? Kind of articulating them.
I've had a lot of trouble with that simply because I feel like some of our programming is mandated and therefore it doesn't necessarily have an outcome per se. I mean, they all have outcomes. I shouldn't say it that way, but you know, if you're told that you have to do a program, you're not really thinking about the outcome as you plan it. You're doing the program because you're told you have to do the program. So trying to find a way to shoehorn in objectives or identify objectives after the program has already been decided and named can be it's a difficult process. And then trying to pull in other stakeholders, other librarians, the administration, needs to be pulled into that process to sort of get them involved and have everyone then understand the importance of outcomes and objectives.
Yeah, that's a really good point about, you know, we can talk about backwards design and it's maybe ideal to work that way, to start with outcomes and then plan everything backwards. But sometimes you do have these programs, either they're already in place or like you said, they've been mandated, been assigned to you, you have to do them. And what are ways that you can, without feeling like you're shoehorning necessarily, kind of do a forwards design almost and try to match up what you're doing and make sure it achieves some sort of outcome that you're looking for. I don't actually know, which is why I'm asking.
Maybe the question is to ask when the person who's assigning the project to you, to ask them what type of outcome are you looking for from the program, as then you would have an idea of what their end goal was rather than just to not ask as well.
I'm going to play devil's advocate and say, what if this is an outside stakeholder who's coming in and just saying, well, no, I want you to do a coding program. Just do a coding program. So there isn't necessarily an outcome in their mind either. It's just a thing of like, this is a fancy word that I know that I think we should be using or touching on, something sort of like that.
Is that something that you experience, any of you? I think it is a really good, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say I have, that's part of why I brought it up. Yeah, that it we routinely have community members who are looking for specific types of programs using sort of not flashy words, but you know, like they want coding, they want STEM, they don't know what that means, they don't know what it looks like. They just know or think that the library should be doing that. So yeah. And I'm not, I mean, we should be, you know what I mean? Like I'm not, you know, but yeah.
So if they're vague about their request, it would make sense to then take their request and design your outcomes within their request. Maybe like the coding is what you're going to offer, but what outcomes do you want to have of that program? Are you going for a program for beginners and you just want to introduce a beginner to that? Do you want a program that is going to offer to all ranges where they're going to be collaboratively learning coding together, which is one of the ways that they recommend coding to happen, is to collaboratively learn? Or are you going to maybe go for the experienced coder who wants and needs those opportunities to go into the more advanced coding?
Yeah, I like that. So it's not exactly backwards design and it's not exactly forwards design. It's almost like kind of meeting in the middle a little bit.
I think the hard part would be to go to your boss or whoever's assigning this to you and say, hey, can we work on these outcomes together? Because they might think, oh, I'm just handing this off to the person, they should be able to run with it. But I think if you kind of loop them back in and, you know, like, hey, we put thought into our programs, we don't just, you know, crank them out.
And I'm sorry, can I just jump in really quick? I would say as someone who is in a director position, I have found that the best programs come when the person who's in charge of the program helps design the program. So if there's something I want to do at the library, I'm not just going to say we need to do coding, figure out coding. I'm going to find resources for them. And if they don't know how to do it, or if they're hesitant about doing it, I would want them to say to me, I know nothing about this, or I need help. And then we could work on it together to develop a program that they're going to feel confident doing, because if they're not confident doing it, it's not going to be a successful program if their heart isn't in it. So I would encourage you, you know, if you do get handed a project where you're like, I have no clue, and I just, I talk to the person who handed it to you and say, help me get excited about this. Why is this exciting? And that can also feed into those objectives.
And then the other thing I would say is if it's not a program you're excited about yourself, maybe that is where finding somebody in the community who is excited about it would be an opportunity to bring in the expert part of connected learning, where you would find that person out there who might be the coding expert, who in the community or in a nearby community is willing to give you that help and that leg up, so that you don't have to be the bulk of the program, maybe, or maybe they can explain it or give you other resources of other people who are also as excited about it.
So that kind of is a good segue into talking about community partnerships, which is our week 4 topic. But before we do that, what questions do you still have about outcomes or backwards design?
Do you have any good resources for developing outcomes?
Yes. So, of course, I'm blanking on them all on the top of my head.
That's okay.
But in the ConnectedLib toolkit, there is a section there's a module on evaluation and assessment. And a big part of evaluation is measuring, you know, how you stacked up against these outcomes that you hopefully set at the beginning of your program. So there are quite a few resources that I have linked in there, especially about like informal learning and how that can be kind of more difficult. So I will pull those out of there and send them around, or you can take a look too at that module. We won't be getting to it in this e-course because there's just so much. But I've got some additional resources in there that could be helpful. Should make a note to myself. Okay, so let's move on to community partnerships. When you saw that we were going to be talking about community partnerships, what was the first thing that came to your mind? What did you think of when you saw community partnerships?
For us, we do community partnerships with different, for individual programs particularly, like we will partner with the hospice group in town, and we do a memory garden where we create little fairy gardens, and they're into memory of something or to make a memory. We also partnership with a few other different organizations in our community to help bring in programming and also cut some of the cost in our programming. And we're doing a workshop where we're making stuffed animals, and we partnered with the animal welfare group in town, so that way they would also benefit from that. And we asked for sponsorship from a few other organizations in town who would like to put their name with that program as well.
So the partnership between you and the animal welfare, what was their role in that?
So when we do the animal workshop, we are going to have them come and bring in animals. And so there'll be animals from the shelter there. And then there will also be the stuffed animals that we're creating are going to be dogs and cats. And then also they're going to have the benefit that we are encouraging people to bring supplies for the animal welfare, but it's also a fundraiser that's shared between the library and the animal welfare group. So we're splitting the profits of that program.
That's fantastic. It'll be really popular with the kids, I'm sure.
I'm sure it will be too.
Let's see. Katie just wrote in the chat, we assume that community partnerships means other organizations that can be experts or resources, but community partners can also be a pathway into a new audience. Yes, that's a really good point. What are some examples of community partners that can help get you in front of people that you weren't reaching before?
Specifically, what was on my mind was I was talking with a colleague the other day, and she wants to start leading a game and craft night for adults with intellectual disabilities. And she held the first one, and she was really disappointed because she put flyers up in all the right places and, put it in the library, quarterly publication, but nobody came. And we have maybe a dozen really strong organizations in this county that work with that target audience in some way or another. And I'm like, did you call any of them? She's like, no. I'm like, I bet if you called, they have, a group of folks that they would love to send over to be a part of your class. And she's like, you know what? I'm going to pick up the phone right now.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. Any others examples like that of getting a pathway?
I have one, but it's not related to youth services.
That's okay.
So I help with our memory cafes, and one of the partners that I've formed a great partnership with is the Alzheimer's Association. And they have been wonderful partners because they have a direct link to folks that have already self-identified as persons with memory loss. So they can do a lot of the reaching out to people to let them know about the memory cafes because that's their direct audience. And then they also attend our memory cafes to provide resources about Alzheimer's disease and other different resources that the families might be interested in. So it's been one of the best partnerships that we've experienced just because I think we're both getting something out of it.
Yeah.
Our last spring we offered a father-daughter or family-daughter hair event, and we reached out to different salons in the area and asked if they would if different salon provider or their workers would come in and help teach people who maybe didn't have the basic skills of doing like a ponytail or a braid to the folks. We had a good turnout because there were a lot of fathers who are in a position where they have to get their daughters ready for school in the morning, and doing hair is not their most skilled thing that they could do. Or there might be a grandfather or somebody else in the family who maybe wasn't skilled, or even a mother came in and did that. So the partnership was to reach out to other salons, and then they could also be sharing the information that with their clients. Hey, we're offering this, we're coming. They also hopefully promote the event as well through their social medias and such like that. And a lot of times that helps as well in reaching audiences and people who might not be looking at your page in social media.
I like that you use the salons to not just reach more people to come to the event, but reach other people to partner and help you with the event. I like that. So it kind of reminds me of, I know in the discussion boards, several people have talked about how they know there are teens that they're not reaching, who are not coming into the library, and the questioning, like, how do I get to those teens? And partners can be a really good way to find an in to those teens. You can find out who isn't coming into your library or who isn't being reached, and find out where they are. You can find partners maybe to kind of bring your programming or news about your programming to them wherever they are, whether it's in a school or an after-school program, the rec center. Those can be really good partnerships for getting to those new audiences as well. All right, are any of you partnering with schools right now?
We're looking at doing a technology petting zoo and asking the school to come in and bring in some technology, some of the librarian technology people to come in and show off the technology that the kids are also utilizing at the school. And we also will put up flyers in our schools, and we will provide the flyer information to the schools for their electronic delivery on the Fridays.
So thinking about partners, and not necessarily thinking about a specific potential partner, but what would be the #1 biggest thing that a community partnership could help you with? Sky's the limit. Reaching more teens says, is it Michelle? Yes. Ditto, says Katie.
I think our libraries typically say they need more time, money, and staff. So if if the partners could bring any of those things, that would be great.
We found that some of the partnerships that we've had, it does contribute a lot towards staff impact, because if you do have a partner who is taking on a considerable amount of the work of the program, then that frees up staff time to do other things and other programming as well. My teen advisory board was just really awesome this last, we did a Harry Potter interactive movie, and I was able to delegate a bunch of activities for the Harry Potter movie, getting ready for it, and it freed up staff time that I otherwise, or we would have had to otherwise do on our staff time, and it was done. I didn't have to be the one putting the bags together, creating the different pieces, painting the rocks and such like that. So volunteering can also be a way that teens can contribute to their program. We've also reached out, and we have we have a group that works with disabled adults who come in and volunteer to cut out things for crafts on their time, which also then frees up staff time as well.
That's great. It is almost like they're creating time for you. And Paula says, also bringing in subject specialists so participants can be diving deeper into content. Yeah, my situation is a little different for you guys because I'm teaching a formal class to undergraduates, but if I could find somewhere a network of potential guest speakers to come in and talk to the kids, like that would be my ideal partner. Somebody could arrange that for me. So what are some ways that, and maybe some ways that you've witnessed or ways that you're just worried about, that a partnership could go wrong? You guys ever experienced something that didn't go so well? You don't have to name names.
There was a time last year that I pulled together a meeting of our different Memory Cafe facilitators, and I did not invite our partner because I thought it was something we could handle internally. And then when I reported back to the partner what we came to the conclusion of in our meeting, they weren't very happy that I had not invited them to the meeting to begin with. But I was trying to, I guess, be cognizant of their time and not waste their time going to a bunch of meetings. So I was just going to report back to them how the meeting went afterwards, but it turns out that they wish that they had been there.
Yeah, so navigating communication expectations, I guess, can be really tricky.
Mm-hmm. So now I invite them to everything. And they can choose if they want to come.
Yeah, that works. Paula suggests they just don't fulfill what they said they would, showing up or material or publicity advertising. And Katie says you invite a subject specialist who has a different idea of what to teach than you had in mind. Or you invite a subject specialist who doesn't like teens. Ooh.
That one happens a lot. People come in because they love the library and they want to help out, and oh yeah, I have this expertise and I'd love to share, and then you put them in a room full of teenagers, and sometimes it's that they don't like teenagers, but sometimes it's they're intimidated by the teenagers, or sometimes they came in to lecture and give what they know, and they don't we haven't been clear with them, I suppose, about what constitutes a great learning experience for teenagers.
Yeah, so I guess I can see how a lot of that could be based on assumptions. So not realizing, like, you both think you're on the same page, and then you realize that in fact you are not on the same page later. And
I think it also, I think it also happens with all ages, that you have a subject specialist but doesn't know how to use that or address or how to work with different ages. So yeah.
Some of the librarians that I talked to, a few people mentioned this, when they were working with individuals, particularly in the community, who wanted to come in and help run a program or teach something, they would often run into that, like the person didn't really know how to work with that age group properly. And so that would kind of be like the librarian's role in the program, and they would sort of both work on it together. So they would have the expert, and then the librarian would provide the youth expertise, basically, and kind of co-run the program that way. And that led to some pretty good partnerships that I've heard about. As long as you have somebody who's willing to take that guidance, I suppose. I want to be mindful of everybody's time and not go too long. What other thoughts or questions do you have about what we've done in the course so far? Or what would you like to talk about that we haven't addressed yet? Everything's perfect, yay. Okay, well, thank you guys for joining. If there's no other questions or comments or chats. And I hope I'll see you again next week when our last call. I can't believe it's already almost the end of this class already. It's gone by very quickly. I've really enjoyed it. Okay, so thank you guys for coming. And I will see you on the website. Bye.
Bye.